Today is the day that the window opens for the application of the franchise tag and the transition tag. And, Josh, this was a 2-day delay to accommodate the CBA negotiations. And the window is opening under the rules of the current labor deal, which means every team has one franchise tag and one transition tag. Usually it's one or the other. And this becomes a factor for a couple of teams.
Yes.
Cowboys, Titans, maybe the Buccaneers. We really don't know what they want to do with Jameis Winston, but the Cowboys have Amari Cooper, the receiver they acquired in trade from the Raiders a year and a half ago, and quarterback Dak Prescott. Titans have quarterback Ryan Tannehill and running back Derrick Henry, and the Buccaneers have pass rusher Shaq Barrett and quarterback Jameis Winston if they want to keep him. And this creates an awkward situation for these teams now because the window's open. What do you do? And I'm a big believer that this is all deadline-driven anyway, and what matters is when it closes, not when it opens. But it is kind of a weird thing that we've got the window opening under this old set of rules while the NFL Players Association tries to figure out what they're going to do with this CBA proposal.
It's a massive wrinkle, the transition tag plus the franchise tag, because in many other years, you'd only have either Dak or Amari Cooper reach free agency. And we were listening to Mike McCarthy at his press conference yesterday, and he was talking about how in sync Dak and Amari were. And it kind of seems like a package for them moving forward. I mean, and a new coach with somewhat of a new system, obviously Kellen Moore is still going to be on that coaching staff. You want to keep some type of continuity and explosion, and I think Michael Gallup's a very good player, but I don't know how the Cowboys could look at themselves in the mirror, give Ezekiel Elliott a contract prior to 2019, and then let a playmaker either, it's not going to happen with Dak Prescott, but in someone like Amari Cooper, who they obviously traded high draft capital for, hit the open market. So I would expect both to be on the roster, obviously heading into next season.
Well, and ideally what the Cowboys would do is get Dak Prescott signed to a contract before the tag deadline so they could use the tag on Amari Cooper if ultimately the CBA goes through and there's only one tag available. But what an embarrassment it will be for the Cowboys if Cooper hits the open market and they can't re-sign him. Because remember, it was a year ago when they were blustering about their first-round pick being Amari Cooper. Oh, what are you going to do when you're on the clock? Well, we're going to watch Amari Cooper film. But the thing is, when you use that first-round pick for a guy who's in the middle of his fourth season and he's got that high-level fifth-year option and then the franchise tag, and you don't have a franchise tag because you have not yet been able to sign your quarterback, and he walks away, that is a huge, huge embarrassment. It's the kind of thing that could get a GM fired if the GM wasn't the owner of the team.
And the relationship that he and Dak had, especially against your Minnesota Vikings last season, it was
really?
I mean, look, I have to fill this chair.
Don't worry about getting makeup for Josh.
I have to fill this chair appropriately. His game against the Vikings was fantastic. Those sideline grabs, those contested catches, that is something you cannot break up, especially with a wide receiver like Amari Cooper, who's had a roller coaster of a career. He's had 6 to 8 game stretches that were one of the best in the league at his position, then 6 to 8 games that were very, very quiet. There seems to be consistency now. But when I look at the true franchise tag across the NFL, just looking at the free agent list, edge rushers, defensive players, it seems like it's going to be the vast majority get that. And so then that allows me and makes me think that that second level group, ones that either get cut, maybe like an Olivier Vernon or Shaq Barrett, who is coming off just one season of fantastic play. It's something that I'm not sure how much I would pay them long term.
Right.
That a tag, just giving them an extra year in their same system, just makes total sense.
Well, and you know, there's a dynamic we saw last year with edge rushers, Frank Clark and Dee Ford. You tag them and then you trade them, and you get a heck of a lot for them, rather than letting them leave as free agents and have that departure factor in to the compensatory draft pick formula the following year. If you can get a first-round pick and a second-round pick for Frank Clark, tag and trade him. If you can get a second-round pick for Dee Ford, tag and trade him. So maybe that's what the Jaguars do with Yannick Ngakoue. Maybe that's what the Buccaneers. Although I think the Buccaneers are determined to keep Shaq Barrett. And Barrett has said enough to imply that he's willing to do a reasonable deal with the Bucs to stay put. He's very conscious of the tax rate in Florida, which is 0. He doesn't want to play for a California team where it's 13.3%. So I think he's sent the signal that he's willing to be reasonable to stay with the Buccaneers. But, you know, for Yannick Ngakoue, I think he's done in Jacksonville. I think he wants out. I think he wants out of Jacksonville. And they tag him. I think tag and trade is a very real possibility.
If Yannick Ngakoue was on a more prolific team, I think he would be considered one of the best edge rushers in the NFL.
He's got 37 sacks, 37 and a half in 4 years.
He's a fantastic player. And I understand some frustration because I don't know if it's the Jaguars' number one priority in 2020 to win football games in Jacksonville right now. I mean, spending 2 games in London, keeping the same losing franchise, both from the general manager and head coach perspective. The reason I brought up Olivier Vernon's name and someone like Robert Quinn is if Matt Judon gets tagged, Chris Jones as well, these second-tier players, because Vernon saw on the Browns might not be for much longer, they might be the ones who are the beneficiaries with major contracts.
Well, it was remember, it was Vernon who got the major contract when Von Miller was caught in the franchise tag, and Von Miller was like, what's going on here? It could be Vernon again.
Yeah. This is an interesting group in that it's a very good edge rushing and defensive line class as well. So how does that wrinkle throw into this whole mismatch and conundrum? Plus, you have the entire Jadeveon Clowney conversation here. And Clowney's a fascinating case because in his trade deal, it was said that he cannot be franchise tagged. Would a team really pay Jadeveon Clowney as the number one defensive contract in the NFL? Someone who might not be known for his pass rushing prowess, at least statistically, yet on the field, when he is on, he's one of the most dominant forces in the NFL.
Right. It's not sacks. It's Chris Sims' patent-pending statistic.
I can't say that here.
F up the play.
Yes.
We can say F up the play. And that's what Jadeveon Clowney does. He creates havoc. He destroys things. He blows the play up and keeps the offense from doing what it wants to do. The problem with Clowney, though, is every time you think it's finally falling together, he ends up with some sort of an injury. He had that dominant performance on the Monday night against the 49ers in Santa Clara. Game of his career, right? And I think without him that night, the Seahawks don't win the game. And then we hear that he had a sports hernia, core muscle injury, whatever label you apply to it, that began to hurt him during the game. It hampered him the rest of the season. And, that's the caveat for a guy like Jadeveon Clowney, because you're paying for the hope that he can be the guy that we saw that Monday night more than once a year, and ideally, on a regular basis.
How do you feel of A.J. Green's situation right now? This is a player who's given so much to the Bengals. 8+ years, had some fantastic seasons. They've made the playoffs. I believe he's played 4 times, never gotten out of the first round. But you have to think in his position, the grass is greener. Like, this is the time in his career to be on a good team, but it might not be by his choice because they obviously can franchise tag him. You have the number 1 overall pick. Joe Burrow is almost certainly headed in that direction. And so you have to have some setup for success. And you have good skill position players around him, right? Tyler Boyd, John Ross, Joe Mixon was one of the best running backs in the league during the second half of last season. But is really A.J. Green going to be thrilled to be playing in that situation now this late in his career?
Part of the problem for A.J. Green is he is not wired to take a stand. He's not wired to hold out. He's not wired to come out and say, I don't want to be here anymore. When Julio Jones was holding out and trying to get more money and toying with the possibility of a training camp holdout, A.J. Green came out and said, I support him. I wouldn't do it, but I support him if he does it. So, sometimes teams get a read on a guy's personality and they take advantage of it. They know the guy isn't going to draw a line and stay away. And I think the reality with the Bengals, they got to ask themselves, what are they going to get out of him if they tag him? He didn't play at all last year.
Exactly.
So you're making a huge financial investment, and that's something the Bengals typically don't like to do. And I think we could see a scenario where they tag him and maybe don't trade him right away, but tag him, see how things play out, see how the early stages of the season go, and then this time around, they do what we thought they were going to do last year, which is trade him at the trade deadline. That could be what they do. But the other thing about the Bengals, when you're dealing with an unconventional team, we can't apply conventional analysis and prediction to what we think a rational, well-run team. Sorry, Cincinnati. But it's I don't know why all of a sudden it's a hot take that the Bengals aren't good and it's not a good football organization. It's been proven year after year, time and again. I still think Marvin Lewis should be there. I think he was underrated and not appreciated for what he did for that team because of all the obstacles, starting with the reluctance to spend the kind of money that you need to spend to have a great organization. But I could see them tag him, keep him, eventually trade him.
And then this road also leads back to Derrick Henry as well. We started this conversation with the franchise tag plus transition tag. Well, if that is off the table, which do you think is more likely? Derrick Henry gets a long-term contract, Ryan Tannehill gets a long-term contract. It would make sense to go in the quarterback route, but he's also the one who's been on the team for a less amount of time. He also impacts the team in a much larger way, even though we all believe Derrick Henry is a very, very talented player. It just has shown the past few big money second-year contracts for the running back position just certainly have not
You instantly regret it.
Yeah.
There's no way the Rams would sign Todd Gurley to the contract they signed him to 2 years ago. They regretted it after one season. And you could say the Cowboys, look at what they got last year from Ezekiel Elliott and say, man, we really shouldn't have done that. So you have to be careful when you're heading in that direction. Derrick Henry's a bit of a different case, though. We have seen him being used more and more. We've seen his production go up. And you just wonder, is he entering now truly prime years? And what do you want the incentive to be in those prime years? You could tag him this year and continue to feed that incentive, that desire to go out and perform, have a 2,000-yard season, which I think Josh, he's capable of. If he played all year long like he does the second half of the season, he would have 2,000-yard season.
It's such a small sample size, Mike, because even 16 games, when you look at it from a large picture, is a small sample size. We only about have half of that, 10 games, just a little more than that, with the Tennessee Titans. And, bringing the band back together, I think, is fun, and the Titans were one of the more exciting teams down the stretch. Obviously, we saw what they did in the playoffs, and they can even improve. I mean, A.J. Brown really didn't hit his stride until the second half of last year, and Ryan Tannehill was one of the best play-action passers statistically in the NFL. I do worry about paying a back like Derrick Henry. Again, I love him. He's one of the best fourth-quarter closers in the NFL.
Today's Jim Brown. I think he's today's Jim Brown, the way he runs.
He is not effective in the passing game right now. When I look at second contract running backs, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey absolutely stand out as players I think would be worth it because they are so multidimensional. They are so diverse and how you can use them in their effectiveness. Derrick Henry is a totally different style. It fits in the identity, and I think that's great with the Titans. But it took them a while to get, obviously, to this identity that they have.
There's a weird vibe with the Titans and Ryan Tannehill also, and I can't really figure out where they're coming from. Now, I understand it with the Buccaneers and Jameis Winston. He threw 30 interceptions. Ryan Tannehill only had the fourth highest single-season passer rating of all time. And he was, even though they didn't overuse him, when they used him, he made good throws. He made good decisions. Now, I worry about his injury history.
Yeah.
He played with a reckless abandon last year that I wouldn't want him playing with if I made a major investment in him, and I think that's the thing you immediately worry about if you give Ryan Tannehill a big contract. Is he going to suffer another torn ACL? Is he going to have some other sort of injury? Is there going to be a regression? And between Mike Vrabel, the head coach, and John Robinson, the GM, I wonder what they are thinking about behind door number 2. There's been so much steam about Tom Brady, but whether it's Tom Brady or Phillip Rivers or someone else, I just can't help but wonder whether they think Ryan Tannehill has taken the team as far as he can, and if we ever want to go next level, we need one of these other guys.
There's one free agent that is not getting enough love. Arik Armstead is the name. The edge rusher, interior defensive
And he
lineman.
may get tagged. He could still get tagged.
I think so.
He could.
They're at about $13 million, and the cap can obviously fluctuate with anything. But there were times this year, obviously DeForest Buckner, Nick Bosa got all the love, but there were multiple game stretches where Arik Armstead would be the number one player on that defense. And
it helps to have D Ford and Nick Bosa.
And it's also funny how these things happen in contract years.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that plays out for Arik Armstead and the 49ers and everybody else who's about to be a free agent.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.